The Democrats' plan to politically persecute Donald Trump and get him behind bars is disintegrating before our very eyes. From Florida and the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case to Fulton County and their attempt to criminalize Donald Trump challenging the 2020 election. Oh, and speaking of that election, there seem to be some ballots missing from Fulton County's recount. We're going to tell you all of those stories coming up in a sec. Plus, Chris Cuomo not only is vaccine injured, you know, the vaccine that he publicly shamed you about not wanting to take, but he's also now taking ivermectin, you know, the medicine that he publicly shamed you for wanting to take to prevent getting COVID-19. We'll show you Chris Cuomo eating all of his words coming up in just a minute. Oh, and the Secretary of Education squirming under direct questioning in Congress about his plans to have your daughters exposed to naked men in school. We've got that and a whole lot more coming up. I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. And we're live streaming right now on Rumble, as we do every day right here at noon. Thanks for joining us if you are with us in the chat room. In fact, if you're in the chat room right now during a live stream, put in a comment so I see you there. All right? I want to talk to you and interact with you throughout the show if I can. Although this is a pretty busy, fast-moving show today, and we've got a lot of short clips that we're going to be interacting with. So I'm not making any promises. Meanwhile, if you're watching us after the fact, hey, come on and set your alarm, or maybe even better, subscribe and click the alerts and notifications there at Rumble or any other platform you're on so you can find out when we do go live and you can join us. And of course, if you're watching this after the fact, please share our video, comment on it. You know what that does. Giving us likes really does help us out, and it literally costs you nothing to do it. And we appreciate all of those likes and all of those comments as our channel, our show, and our presence continues to grow in this very important election year. All right, let's get right to it with big news yesterday out of Fulton County, Virginia. We're going to start with Joseph Rossi. Now, Joseph Rossi is one of the people who has been vigilantly demanding recounts of the 2020 election, specifically in Fulton County. You know that there were a lot of questions about how things were handled in Fulton County and whether the Secretary of State of Georgia actually did their job to ensure that after Election Day and after the recount was done, everybody could walk away with that secure feeling that even if my guy lost, at least we know that everything was done fair and square. And the fact is, there are literally millions of Americans who don't feel that way right now about the 2020 election. Well, Joseph Rossi, even though he's been called an election denier and a fascist and a kook and a conspiracy theorist, he's remained focused on just making sure that the State Board of Elections followed the law. Yesterday, in front of that State Board of Elections in Georgia, he had this to say about the latest findings with regard to Fulton County's ballot counts.
Now I'd like to speak directly to those who have fought factually, respectfully, and relentlessly for the truth over the last 3 years. As of 4/10/24, I got another one of these certified letters from the state election board. Every time I get one of those letters, my wife sets it on my desk and she says, "You got another one of those certified letters. I hope you're not being indicted this time." But anyways, as of that letter, it has now been factually proven that both the hand audit, this is really important, and the certified machine count, yes, the certified count, have both been found to be in violation of Georgia election law. Based on these findings, to those that have fought factually, respectfully, and relentlessly, I'll close with one word: vindicated.
Wow, what a moment, and pretty wholesome as well. There's one part of this that I just want to replay for you because it tells you everything you need to know. The moment when he holds up this letter from the State Board of Elections that he received in April. Here, watch again. Watch his hands.
3 years. As of 4/10/24, I got another one of these certified letters from the state election board. Every time I...
Did you see what I saw? Did you see his hands trembling? as he held that up. This is not a professional lawyer or litigator. This is not some sort of media person. This is just a guy. And he's been through hell he's been put through hell for the last 3 years because he's had some simple questions about what his government in his county and in his state did with regard to a presidential election. And now he's reached this point where he has that letter and his hands are shaking with the culmination of this process and all of the heartache that he's had to endure. You've heard him say, I got the certified letter and my wife thought, oh God, I hope you're not indicted again. Imagine what the machine has put this man through. And there's something so wholesome and emotional about seeing his hands shake as he held up the letter. And by the way, here is that letter. This is what it looks like, as you can see from the Georgia State Board of Election. And it has a reference here to Joseph Rossi about the case number. It says the matter involves allegations that were investigated by experienced investigators. And look at the bottom part underlined. This matter is in the violation found category. In other words, you were challenging the hand counts and the machine counts, and that there were violations to state law with how they were conducted and the findings that they discovered at the ends of those processes. And the State Board of Elections in Georgia has confirmed here that case falls under the category of violations found. They violated the law. This letter also notifies him that on May 7th, there will be a hearing. And, well, if you check the calendar, that was yesterday. So what happened at the hearing? Well, let's start with the attorney for Mr. Raffensperger. He is the Secretary of State down there. You know, he's the Never Trump guy who, recorded the conversation that Donald Trump had when he was president, and he was pressing him to do a legal, legitimate, and valid recount of ballots because there were so many of them that were in question as to whether they should actually be validly counted. Things like missing dates, missing signatures, missing ID, the stuff that we put in place to make sure that an election is done without fraud. And of course, in many states, Georgia being one of them, during the COVID-19 pandemic, that stuff was thrown out the window. So that guy, the so-called Republican Secretary of State, who clearly doesn't like Donald Trump, this is his lawyer who is speaking. He didn't even show up to this State Board of Elections hearing, but his lawyer did. And listen to a couple of things that she has to say here.
Of the presidential contest in 2020. So you will hear a great deal during this presentation about documents such as ballot images, batches loaded reports, and tabulator tapes. And all of those documentation, they're all very important. And we expect that the counties will keep those, maintain those, and make sure that they are complete. But it's important to note that they play no role in the actual tabulation of results in an election. Again, those results are determined by the paper ballots, which we have for 2020. And the conclusion of this investigation, which we will get into the details of in a minute, is that Fulton County used improper procedures during the recount of the presidential contest in 2020.
All right, let me just pause here to let you know sort of what she's saying and what she's not saying. She just said, this is a lawyer talking, so she's trying to make a case that all the evidence you're about to hear doesn't really add up to what you think it adds up to. She talked about electronic records for the ballots. And she said those electronic records are like scans of the records, right? So in case there's a fire or a flood or some sort of problem with the paper ballots, they've got a scan and they've got electronic records. That's good, right? Redundancy. But she just told you that those electronic records, those not used for the recount. Only the paper ballots are used for the recount. She also said, as you just heard her say, we expect the counties to retain all of those scans and electronic records. She says we expect them to do it because what we find out during this hearing is that there's missing electronic ballots. There's missing scans. That redundancy, that backup in case there's a problem with the paper ballots, the backup, the redundancy is corrupted now because they're missing. All right. But then she goes on to talk about, but that doesn't matter. Don't worry about that because we got the paper ballots, and the paper ballots is really all that matters.
The investigation also shows that there are some duplicative ballot images in the ballot images that Fulton County provided. And this suggests that some ballots may have been scanned more than once. But what cannot be decided conclusively or confirms conclusively is whether or not those duplicative ballot images were included in the count. So we don't know for certain whether or not those were in the tabulated results. And
So what she said was, we found that there were duplicates. In fact, they found over 3,000 duplicated ballots. They had been scanned twice, at least twice, right? But she said, sure. Over 3,000 ballots may have been duplicated when they were scanned, but that doesn't mean they were counted twice. That doesn't mean that they were double counted. But you can't prove that they weren't double counted. You also can't prove that they were double counted. All we know for sure is that something illegal and improper happened with the actual scanning of the ballots. But she wants you to believe that even though they were scanned twice, and even though we can't prove that that altered the outcome or not, one way or the other, can't be proven. So therefore, just trust us. Just trust us. Which brings us to this moment, as the members of the State Board of Elections actually have their say with this lawyer and with the evidence at hand.
Does the investigation confirm that there are missing ballot images?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know why 380,761 ballot images from Election Day machine count are not available?
We subpoenaed Fulton County for all of their ballot images. We received approximately 518,000 ballot images.
From Election Day?
Those are for the recount.
Those are from the recount, but we have no ballot images for 380,761 ballots from Election Day, correct?
What was subpoenaed was the ballot images for the recount, because that's what this case was about, not the election day.
Does Fulton County know why there are not 380,761 ballot images from Election Day?
As with the investigators, we have not been apprised of this allegation. This is the first I'm hearing about it. I have no idea what the basis of that allegation is, and so we would have to. We can't answer that at this time.
Would Fulton County agree that every vote should have a ballot image?
Yeah, good question. That woman who stood up off microphone, she's a representative from Fulton County. Let me just break down again, because it's dry stuff, probably why cable news isn't paying attention to it. They're too busy with the porn star right now in Manhattan. Oh, also, the other reason cable news isn't paying attention to it is because, well, remember that word vindicated? This vindicates anyone who dares to have had any questions about how things went down in Fulton County. If only we could do this in Pennsylvania, too, and maybe Maricopa County in Arizona, and also in Wisconsin, and also in, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. What just happened there, and the most important part, is the very first exchange in the video, and I'll play it one more time. It's short.
Does the investigation confirm that there are missing ballot images?
Yes.
Yes, period. That's the end right there. Fulton County didn't have all the votes that it claims it had. At least it can't prove that it has all of the votes that it claimed it had to do its count. That's what this discovered. This is in violation of the law. And as you heard, over 300,000 ballot images are just gone, disappeared. That's the backup. That's the redundancy. That's to ensure of what actually got counted on election day and also in the recount process. And by the way, when the representative of Fulton County stood up, she claimed beyond credulity that she was just first hearing about these missing 300. I have no idea what this allegation is. I had no idea we had 300. Does anyone believe that they had no idea that there were over 300,000 ballot scans missing from Fulton County? Anyone? Of course not. And no, it's not getting a whole lot of coverage. I mean, This part of the story did make it to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, but I doubt it made it to your newspaper or certainly to cable news or broadcast news. Take a look. Here's the headline. Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Fulton County reprimanded for double-scanned ballots in 2020 recount. State Election Board calls for a monitor in Fulton for this year's elections. Yeah, who gets to choose who the monitor is? Reprimanded? Reprimanded? How about who gets fired? How about who gets arrested? I mean, last I heard, Democrats and the left are really, really concerned about protecting our democracy. Because if the guy they don't like gets elected, that's the end of our democratic process in this country. Well, if you really care about protecting democracy, how about the democratic process we use for electing people? You know, like the deterioration of the democratic process in counting ballots and ensuring that ballots aren't counted twice and that ballots don't disappear, because that's what's going on right now under our nose in Fulton County, Georgia. But, you know, there's a porn star testifying in Manhattan, so Lord knows we got to spend all our time looking at that. Meanwhile, more news out of Fulton County. Remember this woman? There she is, Fani Willis. She's the one who was having an affair with the special prosecutor that she appointed and then funneled tax dollars through the prosecution of Donald Trump, the unprecedented RICO charges against him and his advisors and his lawyers for questioning how the ballots were counted. You know, those ballots we just talked about that were duplicated or missing. Yeah. So she's being prosecuted by her. She funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to the private law office of her boyfriend. And then her boyfriend took her to Costa Rica and really fancy restaurants. Well, she was not removed for that conflict of interest. But Donald Trump and his lawyers, they said, well, wait a minute. No. We're going to appeal this decision from the judge. So they took the appeal to the appeals court in Georgia. And as you can see from Mia Cathal's write-up here at Town Hall, bad news for Fani Willis and bad news for the Democrats who are trying to use lawfare to put a presidential candidate behind bars so you can't vote for them, because the Georgia Court of Appeals announced earlier this morning that they will, in fact, hear President Trump's appeal of the Fulton County judge's decision to not disqualify Fani Willis. What does that mean? It means they saw enough valid evidence to call into question that judge's decision. They think that there's enough there to actually hear the appeal. Not only is this bad news because they could come down and say, absolutely remove Fani Willis from this entire thing, but it also, through the due process of our jurisprudence and the president and his co-defendants' rights in Fulton County, this extends the process even further. They were so hoping to see Donald Trump in those horizontal black and white stripes and like the little Monopoly man with the ball chained to his ankle because he's going behind bars. That ain't happening in Fulton County, not anytime soon, because the process will continue. And if you complain about that, or if you want to call it delay tactics, you know, I have a suggestion for you. Next time you want to use the law in a way that it's never been used before, in a completely unprecedented way against a candidate for president, when you're trying to help out your party's candidate for president, maybe you should make sure that the people doing the prosecuting aren't even close to a hint of corruption. Because in Fulton County, that's what you got. And so now the appeal process will go forward, and it doesn't look like that case is going to trial anywhere close to Election Day. And, by the way, that's not the only case against Donald Trump that ain't seeing the light of a courtroom before Election Day, because yesterday, the judge overseeing the so-called classified document mishandling case in Miami, she indefinitely postponed the trial date that was supposed to begin later this month. She said, yeah, this trial ain't going forward because there's way too many unresolved issues to be buttoned up here and cleaned up with regard to the rights of the defendant. That would be Donald Trump. You see, even if Jake Tapper hates him, he still has constitutional rights in this country, and his rights have been violated. One example of the violation, here, let me show you this picture. You remember this picture, don't you? I mean, How can you not? How can you forget this picture? This picture was everywhere. You remember at Mar-a-Lago in the early mornings before the sun came up, it was dark. That made the FBI police sirens look that much more dramatic. Over 30 armed FBI agents stormed through the doors of Mar-a-Lago and raid the home to get those classified documents that Donald Trump is on the verge of selling to the Saudis, including nuclear secrets, undermining our national security, because he's a spy. He's going to be good. They charged him with espionage here and violating state secrets by having these classified documents. So this is critically important they get in there. Well, within a week of that raid, the FBI released this picture. It was everywhere. It was everywhere, right? And just look at it. Obviously, Donald Trump is guilty, because here's the classified documents just spread all over the floor of Trump's office at Mar-a-Lago. What an outrageous handling of classified documents. So, like, he should be thrown in jail without even a trial, right? Well, we've now learned something about this picture. We've learned quite a few things about this picture. In short, this entire thing is a setup. This picture is staged. This picture is, doctored wouldn't be the right word because it would make it sound like somebody photoshopped it to look like something. But no. They did it old school way. They staged and set the whole thing up so they didn't have to use Photoshop. Those classified documents, by the way, it hasn't even been proven that these are classified documents. They got to prove that in a court of law as well. But these documents that you see in this picture that was everywhere, those documents were not on the floor of Donald Trump's office when the FBI raided. They were neatly filed in a filing box, a box that was in President Trump's private office behind a lock that, by the way, had been approved by the National Archive and Secret Service months before the raid. And that office not only locked, but also enjoyed security from the private security firm that patrols Mar-a-Lago on a regular basis, but also by the Secret Service, who patrol Mar-a-Lago on a regular basis because, a former president lives there. Now, that's a far cry from the way Joe Biden kept his documents in the garage, in a box, spilling over next to a can of turpentine and Hunter Biden's cocaine, allegedly. Not only were those documents originally in a box and the FBI deliberately took them out and spread them all over the floor, but you see those yellow and red cover sheets that say top secret on them, right? Look, see this one right at the bottom there that says secret, SCI. It's all red. It's like unmistakable. How can you not know that these are top secret classified documents? Obviously, these are top secret classified documents. Those cover sheets that say top secret and classified, those were not attached to any of the documents in Donald Trump's possession when the FBI raided and then spread them out over the floor. Now, see, here's what the FBI did. They raided, they took the files, they spread them out over the floor. Then they brought them with them, these top secret cover letters that you see right there, and they placed them over the documents that they had just put all over the floor. And then they took this picture. This entire piece of evidence, so-called, that was spread out to the media, the whole thing is a sham. Not only were those documents not spread all over the floor, but the documents never had that attachment that said top secret classified. The FBI put it there. And Jack Smith, the special prosecutor in this case, admitted so in his court document filings earlier this month. By the way, here's the best part. When the FBI put those documents back into the boxes and kept them as evidence, they put them in a haphazard way so that they're impossible now to re-identify and find for the defense. It actually, all the cross-references and the markers and the tabs, they don't match. And the defense has been saying to the judge, we can't even find the classified documents that the FBI claims they put back in because they've been misfiled. How can we defend Trump from having these classified documents when we can't even find them? And Jack Smith's office has admitted in their court filings, yeah, the FBI didn't properly put those back. So the evidence has been tampered with from the very start. And that's why that case has been postponed indefinitely. And of course, the other case that Jack Smith has brought against Donald Trump for his actions on January 6th, you know, where he gave a speech and therefore that means he's, I don't know, an insurrectionist or something. That's also postponed because the president's due process is now sitting at the Supreme Court to determine what his immunity might be. Whatever the decision from the Supreme Court, most people think that it'll be sent back down to the lower court to actually determine what part he gets immunity from and what part ends up going to trial. But then that will probably be appealed back to the Supreme Court. So that case ain't seeing a courtroom either. I guess my bottom line in all of this, guys, is that all but the case going on up in Manhattan right now, which is a complete and total fraud, everything else seems to be pretty much over until after Election Day. So the plan the Democrats had to win the election without you even casting a vote, it's not going to happen. And so now the Democrats are crying. They're crying in their beer big time. And I guess they're going to have to go back to the drawing board. I guess maybe Jack Smith will bring up new charges against Trump. We'll see how that sticks. Can your savings weather an economic storm? That's a good question. Have you asked yourself that question? Think about what you put away for the future, right? Whatever kinds of savings accounts you've got or retirement accounts, think about that money right now. Inflation can render the value of those accounts, if they're cash, absolutely worthless. It's happened before. By the way, if your savings is in real estate, well, just think about the crash of 2008. That can happen again. And if it happens right around the time you're ready to retire, you're out of luck. Economies built on a mountain of debt can fall like a house of cards. You know that. History will tell you that. But there are very few physical assets you can invest in that can stand the test of time. Gold is one of them. Gold has withstood as a valued form of money for millennia, literally. It's why people are flocking to it now, and it's why Birch Gold is busier than ever. They've got a knowledge about a little-known tax loophole that Birch Gold can let you use to convert a retirement account into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. And the best part is it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. Why don't you get more information about this? Text Larry to 989898. Claim your free info kit on gold. I'll ask you again, can your IRA or 401k weather an economic storm? If not, or if you're not even sure, call the people I trust. Birch Gold. Text Larry to 989898. Secure your savings today. Yesterday, the Secretary of Education, Mr. Cardona, he was testifying before the Committee on Education. And the purpose of this testimony was to sort of flesh out the new rules with regard to Title IX provisions. This, of course, is supposed to protect women's rights in school from discrimination. And the Biden administration and Secretary Cardona, he's rewritten those regulations to basically include the definition of a woman being a man who is now identifying as a woman. And of course, we know the can of worms that opens. Not only will people's free speech be violated if they use the wrong pronoun against somebody, but also women's privacy will be violated. Their security will be put at risk because they will no longer be able to be in a ladies' room with just exclusively ladies or a women's locker room, not to mention the competitive disadvantage that they'll have when they play sports against, well, what can only be described as a biological man. So Congressman Burgess Owens of Utah, he had some sharp questions for the Secretary of Education in this regard. By the way, it should be pointed out that Burgess Owens is a college athlete of his own right, including a Super Bowl champion with the Oakland Raiders, football player. So he knows about college sports and about the inequity of what the Biden administration is about to do. Take a look at this blistering line of questioning and note specifically how the Secretary of Education tries to weasel out of saying anything.
Mr. Secretary, you're in a very unique position to impact the lives, futures, and fortunes of millions of female athletes. Americans on both sides of this debate need to know how deep your commitment is. Would you force your daughter to undress in the bathroom with boys who are also undressing?
I am not going to be commenting on athletics rules
Well,
that we haven't
okay.
proposed.
You can't say yes or no on that?
I'd be happy to talk about a Title IX.
If your daughter was reporting she felt uncomfortable in a boy's presence in a bathroom or locker room, would that be considered by your administration discrimination or bigotry?
As an educator for over 25 years,
You can't say yes or no to that?
I'd love to respond to your question, sir.
Okay, so yes or no. Would it be considered discrimination? She did not want that to happen.
As an educator for over 25 years, we have had the
Okay, all right.
responsibility.
I don't have but a few minutes here. Girls have now entered in contact sports of boxing and wrestling. Would you allow your daughter to physically fight and get beat up by a boy who called himself a girl? Yes or no?
Be happy to, once we finalize our regulations on Title IX athletics, to
Okay,
come
let
back
me
and
just
have
say
a
this.
conversation with you.
Let me just read this real quick. There's a Cherokee proverb that says, "A man's highest calling is to protect women, so she is free to walk the earth unharmed." I'll say this, Mr. Secretary, before I go into this next topic. With all due respect, I pray that our country will never, ever have the vision that your policies are now driving us toward in terms of manhood. It's a vision that teaches our boys that harming girls is no big deal. I pray that we remain a country that produces overwhelmingly mass majorities of men who feel the way I do about my girls. I will give my life in a heartbeat for my girls. And the blessings I have is they have no doubts about that. There are millions of men and women across this country that do not have faith, do not have trust in you protecting our girls because of policies you can't say yes or no to. By the way, those are not very hard questions as a father. It's either yes or no, and you could not answer that. Okay.
That's right. I love Burgess Owens and his dignity and plain speak that he brings to the table. My favorite congressmen are the ones who don't talk like congressmen. And Burgess Owens is one of them. Now, a couple of things to unpack here. This was a 5-minute questioning. I just showed you a couple of minutes of it. But throughout much of it, the Secretary of Education kept saying the same thing. You heard a little bit of it there. We're still in the process of working out the final rules when it comes to athletics and athletic facilities, so I don't want to comment on it. He's a weasel. Everybody in the Biden administration are trying to weasel out of this because they know the political impact of it. They're trying to thread this needle where they get it done to please their radical, well-funded base who are trying to push these transgender issues down the throats of the American people who don't want to have anything to do with them. Yet at the same time, do it in such a way that doesn't alienate, normies like us who would never vote for such a thing. And at the same time, try to sort of pivot and call you and me and Burgess Owens hateful bigots for daring to say that, young girls should be able to undress in private without a fully intact male right next to them. So every time the Secretary of Education tried this weasel move to say, well, I can't really comment on this because we're still in the process of working out the rules as it goes to athletics, that's just a lie. He can 100% comment on this. In fact, the rule process that the Department of Education is going through right now, that's not some sort of secret private process. I mean, I'm sure they'd love it to be, but this is a public process. Everybody can comment on it. You can comment on it. I can comment on it. In fact, they even open up to public comment. If you go to the Department of Education, they actually have a portal welcoming public comment. So everybody else is allowed to publicly comment on it, but the actual man who is driving the agenda for these rules isn't allowed to. Bull. Of course he can comment. And in fact, if it wasn't a politically volatile issue, he'd be commenting up and down the wazoo. If he were the director of the EPA and they were doing a public comment session for rules pertaining to greenhouse gases, he and Buttigieg would be up there thumping our chest. Here's what we plan to do. Now, we're going to go through the process of working out these rules, but when all is said and done, this is what we're going to do to save the planet. And they'd be doing this with their, thank God we're here, because the planet would be destroyed if we weren't keeping you from using a gas stove. That's exactly what they'd be doing. So when he says he can't comment, publicly about the rules process. It's just an out and out lie. And he's delivering that lie to try to weasel out of the reality. But see, now Burgess Owens, he's a smart man. And he didn't ask the question about the rules. I mean, he started to. But then when he got the weasel words, he decided, you know what, let me ask you another question. If your daughter complained about a man undressing in the locker room right next to her at school, would she be guilty of discrimination? Now, that's a really simple question. It doesn't have anything to do with the Department of Education. It doesn't have anything to do with the law. It has nothing to do with the federal government, state government, or local government. It has to do with what kind of father you are. And more importantly, what kind of rights our daughters should have. Now, Secretary Cardona, he didn't want to answer that question either. And of course, we all know why. Because if your daughter does in fact complain about having to undress in front of a fully intact biological man, or having to endure the indignity of seeing a fully intact biological man disrobe in front of her, right next to her in the locker room, if she complains about that, if Secretary Cardona and the Biden administration and all of the money that props this sorry excuse for a White House up, if they have their way, and boy, oh boy, they're about to have their way with Title IX, in fact, your daughter would be guilty of discrimination. The school could reprimand her or punish her. Or if the school doesn't do anything and tries to protect her, that biological male who forced that disgusting indignity onto your daughter, that young man's family can now sue the school system for discrimination. And therefore, that's why the school will, in fact, protect him and not protect our daughters. And God bless Burgess Owens for laying it out there exactly how it needs to be. Sadly, this did not get the attention, again, that it should have yesterday across all of cable news. That's why we deliberately are bringing it to you. The reason it didn't get attention yesterday is because a porn star was testifying in Manhattan. And boy, that's what we all have to focus on, right? That's the most important story we've got. And just to bring it home here, so that you can vividly understand exactly what Joe Biden, his Secretary of Education, his Attorney General, and his political party, the Democrats, want your daughters to endure. Here's Riley Gaines on Sage Steele's podcast describing vividly exactly what it was like for her the first time she had to endure this with the swimmer now known as Leah Thomas.
When you first saw him up close and in person for the first time?
Well, first I had to do this because he's so tall.
He's huge.
He's huge. Wikipedia says he's 6'1", but understand Wikipedia is lying to you. He is 6'4". So I mean, this Goliath of a man. His feet are huge. Of course, wearing a women's swimsuit with a bulge. Like there was so much about this where I was just like, oh my gosh.
So what
We
was your
couldn't
reaction when
help-
you saw him in person for the first time?
It
In,
was
in a
ki-
swimsuit.
We were kind of like me and my teammates. Actually, the first time I saw him was in the locker room. And so, as I said, which let me just kind of set the scene. A swimming locker room is not a place of modesty. So it's a very intimate, not modest environment. And there's also a lot of course, fully undressing.
Of course.
So I'm in the locker room. I have my back turned, of course, undressing. I believe I was going from my practice suit back into my street clothes. And all of a sudden you hear a man's voice in that locker room. Of course, it's awkward. It's embarrassing. It's uncomfortable. It was innate for every single girl in that locker room to like cover themselves, whether it was with their hands or their clothes or their towels, and to leave as quickly as they could. But I mean, of course, it's an utter violation. It felt like betrayal. It was traumatizing. And maybe not even necessarily traumatizing because of what we were forced to see or how we were forcibly and non-consensually exploited. It was traumatic for me to know just how easy it was for those people who created these policies to totally dismiss our rights to privacy without even a second thought, without
course.
even bare minimum forewarning us. And so he kind of just went off and I mean, he was in the wide open and just takes his clothes off and lo and behold, Thomas and all of his glory or lack thereof. So that's what the experience was like.
That's the world that the Democrats want to foist upon your daughters. That indignity that was just described. And Riley Gaines is a woman of great dignity and courage and focus. But here's the thing. I don't know. I know it's old fashioned, and I know that we're called bigots, and I know that we're called culture warriors. And this is all a fake story for the Christian right that's trying to scare and demonize and whatever. I don't care. I'm past that at this point. Here's the old-fashioned notion that I have as not just a father of two daughters, but also just as a mature man in our society. I think maybe the first time a young woman sees a naked man, it should be a time of her choosing, with her consent, something that she is prepared for in every possible way. Maybe when she's 14 years old and she's going to her freshman high school gym class for the first time and having to undress, it shouldn't be in front of a man, and she shouldn't actually see male sexual organs at that time in her life. I know that's it's unpopular. I know that I sound like a real Neanderthal conservatives there, but last I checked, I think it would be okay to raise your daughter in such a way where she doesn't see a naked man right next to her until, I don't know, maybe even her wedding night. Shocking, isn't it? The Biden administration and his party, the Democrats, they want you, if you think that way, you think the way I think, they want you to suffer criminal repercussions. That's what's at stake here. And I'm glad Riley Gaines just laid it out there as clear as possible. Recently, Chris Cuomo revealed on his nightly News Nation show a stunning announcement. Take a look.
New York Times released an article that's getting a lot of play that says that there are thousands of people who say they're still suffering side effects they believe from the vaccine, and that those have been ignored. Now, one of them is nurse practitioner Sean Barkovich. He says he got his first dose in 2020, had side effects. Just standing up sent his heart racing, stinging pain in his eyes, mouth, groin. Those have gotten a little bit better, but he still has what they call tinnitus. That's a ringing in the ears. We know that vaccines can have unintended consequences, AKA side effects, but nobody's really talking about it because they're too afraid of blame and they just want it to go away. But the problem is people like Sean and me and millions of others who still have weird stuff with their blood work and their lives and their feelings, physically, are not going away.
Did you catch that? He's talking about people who are feeling severe side effects, even in some cases injuries, thanks to the COVID-19 shot that was foisted upon so many of us. Did you hear, though, what he just revealed? People like Sean and other people like me. That's right. Chris Cuomo said on his show that he is suffering side effects. He is basically counted amongst what can only be described as the vaccine injured. Now, we've got more on this, but I want you to watch a little bit more of this segment because, maybe it took him to actually have to suffer from this thing, but he's one of the few broadcast journalists who's actually exploring this and interviewing a person who has felt very real injuries to the shot. Now, I'm glad that the news is getting out there. I'm sorry that it took him to have to actually experience it firsthand. Journalists don't actually have to feel directly impacted by a story to decide, oh, this is worthy of our attention now. But hey, at least it got out there. Watch a little bit more.
Sean Barkovich joins us now. Sean, why do you believe it's the vaccine, and what has happened when you've tried to get clinical analysis of it or answers?
Why do I believe this? It's not a belief, it's a fact. And as soon as I was injured, 15, 20 minutes of my first dose, I had numbness tingling up and down my injected arm that over days spread to my face and my eyes. I went to see a neurologist. He ran some tests. He's like, well, this is all new. We don't know much about it, but the hospital is going to mandate it. You should get a second dose. And everything in my medical mind and in my bones was telling me, no, if you have a reaction after something, don't do it again. But the pressure was immense. And then 3 weeks rolled around, I got a second dose. And after that, everything blew up. I went from being a healthy, 100% healthy, fully functioning nurse to in a complete downward spiral of health. I had a myriad of symptoms.
Have you gotten any clarity from doctors or from the drug manufacturer putting out any information about what could happen as a side effect?
No, as a research nurse practitioner and somebody who worked on vaccine research, I thought after I was injured, there would be people to help me. I'm like, I'm in New York City. I will have there will be medical people ready to help me. There must be interest to find out what happened or what went wrong with me. I reached out to my political representatives. I reached out to the NIH, the CDC, the FDA. I got no answers. No one wanted to touch it. I got token responses back or no response.
In fact, Sean, again, he's a nurse, so he knows his way around medicine and what goes on here. Some would say nurses in some cases like this are even more knowledgeable firsthand than MDs. He ended up, and revealed this in the interview, he ended up taking his own blood sample and sending it to a lab in Germany for analysis because he couldn't find a lab who would actually do the full blood work to determine whether there was some actual direct effect from the COVID-19 shot. That's how powerful the forces are in this country with regard to keeping this information squelched. So kudos to Chris Cuomo for actually shining a light on this. You know, no, actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to give kudos to Chris Cuomo because that same Chris Cuomo who finally has decided that, oh, gosh, this is a very real thing and I'm COVID-19 injured. I have side effects, so let's really spend some time talking about it. Well, that Chris Cuomo is also the same as this Chris Cuomo.
But the problem is, how are they going to know who's vaccinated? You just said they showed the card. That's not the answer. The answer is a vaccine passport. Part of the reason that you're seeing what you're seeing in Florida is because of vaccine hesitancy. And an aspect of vaccine hesitancy is politics, especially in your state. Don't Fauci, Florida. We all know that was about. Do you feel responsible for spreading a message where I'm not going to take it because I don't care what Biden wants? Byron Donald's not going to take it because he doesn't care what Biden wants. You think that's a good message for people to hear?
Well, the first thing is my message was never about Joe Biden. The message is about me and my own personal health.
I'm not getting vaccinated because I don't want to. Hold on, I want to read your words. I want to read your words. Byron, I know you don't get to cut me off. It's my show. But not requiring their customers to wear masks anymore. The unvaccinated are still being encouraged to, but proof won't be required. See, it's easy to see who is wearing a mask, right? Because either you got it or you don't. But if you don't have one on, how would you ever know if the person is vaccinated? I guess they could tell you. Would you believe them? So will all the unvaccinated just ditch their masks now? Because no one's going to be able to tell the difference.
Oh, the sanctimony is strong with this one, isn't it? Yeah, that guy, that Chris Cuomo, who publicly shamed and debated and discussed all of these morons who dare to think that maybe there's still some questions to be asked about this vaccine. And especially considering the fact that we learned ultimately that it wasn't even a vaccine, not by the original definition of vaccine. In fact, they even had to change the definition of vaccine. And now, since he got the thing that he kept publicly proclaiming everyone had to do it. In fact, you should have a passport so we know who you are, and you shouldn't be able to go to Costco unless you show your passport. You shouldn't be able to function in society. So, of course, people are like, wow, maybe I should do this. And they did it. And God forbid, imagine if other people are feeling health effects, just like Chris Cuomo is, because Chris Cuomo himself publicly shamed people to do this thing that in their heart they didn't want to do and didn't feel like they needed to do. Which brings us to yesterday, where Chris Cuomo made a further revelation as the symptoms of his COVID-19 shot injury continues to grow and hamper him. He said this.
I'll tell you something else that's going to get you a lot of hits. I am taking a, what do they call it? Like a regular dose, whatever. They're trying to build up of ivermectin. Ivermectin was a boogeyman early on in COVID.
You couldn't talk about it.
That was wrong. We were given bad information about ivermectin. The real question is why?
Hold on. I'm gonna let you finish, Chris. But people like Chris Cuomo, they like to mock and make fun of people like me. People like some of the fine, incredible journalists at the town hall websites, including Hot Air and PJ Media and Red State and Twitchy and Bearing Arms. They like to suggest, we're not real journalists. We're internet journalists, right? We're just bloggers. They still use the word blogger sometimes to try to diminish the work that we do. The work that we do and our sisters, not our sister sites, but our friends, our compatriots, people at the Federalist or the Blaze or whatever your favorite web, Breitbart, my old buddies at Breitbart where I used to work. Are you kidding? We're the fever swamp. We're not real journalists. The work we do is never up for Pulitzers or Peabodys, right? We're never going to win any awards for the great, very serious journalism that we do. But here's Chris Cuomo, Yale Law School graduate, I think he's got a journalism school degree as well. ABC News, CNN, Now News Nation. He's the real journalist. And did you hear what he just said? Ivermectin was a boogeyman. We were lied to about it. Wait a minute. So in other words, he was told information by the government about ivermectin, and he just then repeated it on the air without checking it himself. I don't do that. I wouldn't do that. My colleagues at Town Hall wouldn't do that. That's called journalisming. That's what you're supposed to do. Wow. Hey, the government told us this, so we just broadcast it. He did more than just broadcast things about ivermectin. We'll get to that in a minute. We were lied to? No, Chris. This is on you. You're supposed to do research. I can tell you, as at the same time, the FDA and the Biden administration were mocking you for taking ivermectin. I had doctors on my radio show every single day in Washington, D.C., telling you that ivermectin was perfectly safe. And studies show that it might actually be quite effective against a virus like COVID-19. You were lied to, Chris. You participated in the lie. And boy, oh boy, now isn't it something that he himself is taking ivermectin?
Everyone's going to say, Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right. But that's not what matters. What matters is the entire clinical community knew that ivermectin couldn't hurt you. They knew it, Patrick. I know they knew it. How do I know? Because now I'm doing nothing but talking to these clinicians who at the time were overwhelmed by COVID and they weren't saying anything. Not that they were hiding anything, but it's cheap. It's not owned by anybody. And it's used as an antimicrobial, antiviral in all of these different ways and has been for a long time.
For malaria for over almost 20 years.
Yeah. So, and my doctor, who is now my doctor, was using it during COVID on her family and on patients, and it was working for them.
Chris Cuomo right now, and listen, he's sick and he's coming around, and I don't want to discourage him from coming around and reaching the truth, but he needs to face the fact not only did he spread misinformation about the COVID-19 virus, about masking, about the shot, and about ivermectin. But ultimately, what he really needs to come to grips with is that he and the people surrounding him at the time at CNN are sloppy, lazy journalists. That's the real truth. Now, that's going to take a lot more for him to reach the realization of, but that's the reality here. That's what we're really dealing with, because every single thing he just said about ivermectin, I had expert scientists and doctors on my show. I know that we had columns written at Town Hall. Oh, they tried to shadow ban it through big tech and through Google and through YouTube and Facebook. but we were reporting it. We were writing it at town hall. Every single person on that panel he was just on knew the facts. You knew the facts about ivermectin because you sought out the information from alternate outlets. The journalism was there. Chris Cuomo was just ignoring it and refusing to do it because, I'll say it again, he's a lousy, lazy journalist. And let's just understand exactly the extent to which Chris Cuomo drank the Kool-Aid about ivermectin.
People who are injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh my God. What person? You talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer, really?
They are shaming themselves. No one has to shame them. They're shaming themselves.
No, they need to be shamed.
Yeah.
They need to be called out and shamed.
Yeah. Yeah. Buddy, you didn't just pass on the news that was given to you without looking at it with a skeptical eye. You did more than that. Your words just now. They should be shamed. They should be publicly shamed. Where's the apology? Where's your shame? By the way, there is one glorious aspect to what you just saw. Both of those guys have been fired from that job. They didn't even live up to the lowered standards of CNN. They both got at. I've been saying that word a lot. I'm sorry for all the bleeps that you have to put in here for later broadcast, Kevin. Listen, I'd love to continue to blame CNN and Chris Cuomo and all the people who fed you misinformation. Honestly, they should be publicly shamed. They should be ridiculed. They should be lectured to, like I'm doing right now. But let's not forget who's really responsible here. Let's not forget, ultimately, who's really to blame.
I just got a monthly briefing from my COVID team. And here's the latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. While we're starting to see initial signs that cases may be declining in a few places, cases are still rising, especially among the unvaccinated. There are still 85 million Americans who are eligible to get vaccinated or remain unvaccinated and at real risk. Across the country, virtually all of the COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths continue to be among the unvaccinated. In Alabama, more than 90% of the current hospitalizations are among the unvaccinated. In Texas, 95% of those in hospitals are unvaccinated. Right now, it's worse in states where overall vaccination rates are low. But let me be clear, even in states where the vaccination rate is high, the unvaccinated in those states are also at risk. And we're seeing cases rise as a result. Quite frankly, it's a tragedy. There are people who are dying and who will die who didn't have to. So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life and it could save the lives of those you love. And the good news is that more people are getting vaccinated. Overall, weekly new vaccinations are up more than 80% from where they were a month ago. While it can take up to 6 weeks to get fully protected after your first shot, this increased level of vaccinations is going to provide results in the weeks ahead. Just remember, we have two key ways of protecting ourselves against COVID-19. One, safe, free, and effective vaccines. And two, masks. Vaccines are the best defense, but masks are extremely helpful as well.
And of course, we all know that they're lies now. But that message from the president using the bully pulpit, saying we now have a pandemic of the unvaccinated, the public shaming, forcing people to call out their loved ones if they're not vaccinated, to say that they wouldn't socialize with them or have them over at their homes or interact with them unless they get vaccinated. And, of course, the pressure on corporations to fire people who were not vaccinated, kicking people out of the military if they weren't vaccinated, violating their rights as well. It's disgusting. It's despicable. It's a dark time in our history. And now everyone is supposed to just forget about it. They want you to just forget about it. I don't think we should. Maybe it's me. But a violation of our personal, civil, and constitutional rights like that should actually be explored a little bit further instead of swept under the rug. And if I were Donald Trump running for election this year, I would make that a center point of his campaign. I would say, listen, a lot of mistakes were made during the pandemic, and a lot of laws were violated, and a lot of rights were abused. And we need to come to terms with that. The Biden administration is never going to do it because they were the chief violators of it. But if you elect me, we're going to finally have a Warren Commission-style investigation into everything. And I'm calling right now on every agency to retain all of their records because my attorney general will spearhead that investigation. And if laws were violated, there will be criminal charges brought. I don't know about you, but a whole lot of people who are currently thinking of supporting Robert Kennedy Jr. instead of Trump, and they're not a lot, but there are some, I think they might like that kind of message. I'm just saying, Mr. Trump, you might want to add that to your list of things you're going to get to in those first 100 days. And Chris Cuomo, do feel better. You know what will make you feel better? Getting this off of your conscience. Come clean and do a full mea culpa. Here's how you apologize in most Judeo-Christian faiths, and I believe you're Catholic. You acknowledge what you did. You say that you were sorry for it. You, by the way, go directly to the people who you sinned against and who were affected by what you did. And you try to make amends. And then you promise that you will be better and you will improve and you will not do it again. That's how we do things. I know you know this, Chris. And that truth right there, that, my friend, will set you free. And then maybe you'll start feeling better. Get well soon. That's it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Oh, no, wait. Tomorrow's Thursday. What day is this? We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry.